Welcome. In this video, we will take a closer look at card properties. We will discuss individual card properties, going card by card, dynamic fields, in which certain fields only appear based on the value of another field, and finally, disabled fields, that is, when are fields not able to be edited.
We begin by logging into our installation server. Enter in a username, a password, accept the terms and conditions, and then click on the login button. From here, we'll select an existing deployment, in this case OPDev KVM10, and then we'll have arrived on the deployment page. Now that we're on the deployment page, let's take a closer look at the individual card properties. Let's begin with the database card. The database card, I'll select on the left, and we'll see all the properties on the right. So the first field I would like to call out is the nickname field. So this field is responsible for the title of the card. So if I were to change it from OP Prod Database to OP Database, and I click somewhere else on the page to change focus, we'll see that the card has actually updated the title to represent the new value of that field, which is now OP Database. So that's what the nickname field is responsible for. This card also has a whole bunch of other properties, including host name. So what machine are we going to be installing the OpenPages database on? We have things like the operating system, so we support Windows, Linux, AIX, and depending on what value is selected here, we'll also change values for path fields. So for example, if in this case we have Linux, if I were to switch it to Windows, you'll see the path for Oracle Data Home Directory change to a Windows default path, and vice versa. If you were to switch from Windows back to Linux, you would then have those values change as well. So if there's a particular field that you're unsure of what it is, we have these tooltips. You can hover over it and it'll provide more information. So for example, use this one field we're looking at now, which is use default database. This one enabling will use the default database tablespace name. So if you don't really care and you want to use the default database, keep this enabled. Otherwise, deselect it. One field that warrants some call out is this install database dropdown. So there's a few different scenarios here for the database. So if the database schema is not yet installed, you can use OpenPages installer to install it, and for that particular scenario, you would select full database. Otherwise, if your database administrator completed only the database schema installation that required DB privileges but nothing more, you can select the only non-DBA option, and then the installer will handle the rest. Otherwise, if everything's already been installed, you have the database schema, and there's nothing else for you to do, then you can simply select already installed. So here's our first example of a dynamic field. So right now it's full database. If we were to scroll down, you'll see a whole bunch of values like Oracle Data Home Directory, things like that. But if I were to change this from full database to already installed, you'll notice that there's a lot of fields that were removed as a result of that. If I change it back, you'll see that come back as well. So that's one example of dynamic field. Another is this database vendor. So as you may be aware, we support Oracle and DB2. If I were to change it from Oracle to DB2, all of the Oracle specific fields will disappear because they're no longer relevant. But for the sake of things, let's switch it back to Oracle so we can go through some more of those. We have base currency. This is responsible for the default base currency to use in the database. You can go through and select whichever currency fits your particular deployment. If you're using Oracle, we also have identifier type, so you can use either SID or service name. Depending on which one you decide to select, the value of that particular identifier type would be you would enter here in this identifier text field. Other than that, there's a directory, username, password, alias, things like that. You can also take advantage of two separate Oracle features. There's Oracle Enable Text as well as Oracle Skip DB Memory Check. Depending on whether or not you want to take advantage of them, you can toggle those on or off. And one other thing that is on every card as well is this rollback on failure. enabling will roll back the server when a failure occurs. So users can decide to toggle that on or off based on the card that they're working with. So let's move now to the deployment manager card. So as we saw previously, we have a nickname, a host name for the server that we'd like to install this particular component on. Operating system, one new field here is this remote deploy. So the remote deploy field is basically responsible for letting us know whether or not we need to install the remote agents on this host or not. So in most cases, you'll likely want to keep this enabled because in most cases you'll have it installed on a remote machine. Otherwise, if it's disabled, what that means is basically we're installing this server on the same server that is hosting our web installation server. So depending on your configuration, your deployment, you can select the corresponding value. So if it's selected, we have other things to input like agent port, SSH port, username, password. The local username and password is the username and password corresponding to the host, and that's so we can install the agent on that particular machine, etc. Otherwise, for the deployment manager card, we just have a lot of other specific things. For example, for WebSphere, for support directories, OP storage directory, things like that. Nothing else really here warrants a call out, with the exception actually of this Java home directory. So for OpenPages 7.4, we support Java 8, so provided here a path to a valid Java 8 path, and preferably it would be the one for IBM that's included in the media. So that is that. Let's move over to the application server card. So once again, we'll see a lot of the same fields that we've seen before: nickname, hostname, operating system, remote deploy. Then we start getting into some of the application server specific fields like WAS home directory, node name, server name. One field to call out here is the OP vertical cluster number. So this text field is responsible for how many clusters are you going to actually have on this application server. By default, it's one, meaning you have one application server on this host. However, if you wanted to have multiple, then you can take advantage and use vertical clusters, and this is how you would go about doing that. Now let's take a look at the reporting server card. This reporting server card has a lot of things dealing with Cognos. So you'll see Cognos home directory, the port, URL context root. Again, if there's anything in question, you can just hover over the tooltip and that'll hopefully provide you a little bit more information on that. And then the last card that we haven't talked about is the workflow. So I'll quickly add one of those just so we can see what that looks like. So here's a workflow card. Once again, you'll see a lot of the same stuff: nickname, host name, and then we start getting to some of the workflow specific fields like BPM, dmanager profile name, server port, more directories, things like that. So we've gone card by card over the different properties. We've gone through and shown some different dynamic fields. Now let's take a look at when fields may become disabled. So I'll go ahead and switch to a deployment where I've already installed OpenPages. So in this case, I've installed OpenPages, and we'll see that a lot of fields actually now are starting that are actually disabled. So the reason for this is because once OpenPages has been configured, there's a lot of fields where if we were to update the value, it would cause issues in your deployment. So for those particular fields, we disable those. However, there are some fields that we still allow users to be able to update that won't cause harm. For example, a lot of usernames and passwords will still be editable in case those expire in your particular deployment, etc. The nickname is also always editable because that just represents the name of the card, however you want to refer to that. If we were to switch to dmanager, we scroll through some of these properties, you'll see that in addition to username and password, we also have the OP storage directory field that still remains editable. Everything else is disabled. If we were to switch to the application server card, again, nickname is still enabled, username and passwords are. However, and also this OP vertical cluster number is still enabled here. So the reason for that is in case you wanted to add a new node and increase it from 1 to however many nodes, you can do so here. So for more information on how to add a node after OpenPages has initially been installed, I'll refer you to a separate video that we have for that as well. And then for the other cards, it's per usual, mostly just username and passwords that are still editable. So this concludes our video. In this video, we have discussed the individual card properties, going card by card. We have shown a few dynamic fields in which certain fields only appear based on the value of another field. And finally, we touched upon fields that become disabled after installing OpenPages. We hope you found this video helpful, and we invite you to follow along with some of our other videos.